Hello, and welcome to Books and the World, a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center. Books and the World is an interview show produced by the Cape Cod Writers Center over Cape Cod Community Access Channel to show how writers, illustrators, publishers, editors, and others in the literary field play their roles in the world of books and other media communication. The Writers Center was established 57 years ago, and Books on the World has been broadcasting continuously for 41 years. We sponsor a 4-day annual conference every summer. Today, we are delighted to welcome Barbara Eppich Struna, co-author with her sister Barbara Eppich, Order of the Sisters Ursuline, and the book is Family, Friends, and Faith, an Inspirational Life. So thank you for coming,
I'm
Barbara.
happy to be here.
I want to just read a little bit of your biography. Mm-hmm. Barbara Eppich Struna is an international best-selling author and storyteller at heart. She crafts her tales based on her own personal experiences. She has 3 suspenseful historical novels in her Old Cape series. She is a member of International Thriller Writers, member in Letters, National League of American Penwomen, president of Cape Cod Writers Center, Sisters in Crime, National New England and Los Angeles, and writes a blog about the unique facts and myths of Cape Cod. She has written several suspenseful historical novels available as paperback and ebook through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBook, and independent booksellers. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, this is the story of a Catholic nun and her family, and you're part of that family. Mm-hmm. It is aptly titled Family, Friends, and Faith. First of all, people may be confused about the 2 Barbara Eppichs, so can you explain?
Sure. I was 5 years old when my sister Barbara Eppich, entered the convent. She was 18, and
was that her name? What was her
Her
first
name was Nancy Rosemary Eppich. And at that time, you had to give up your name because you were going to be a whole different person, a different life and everything. And she wanted to have Sister Barbara as her name, I guess because I was the baby. And they said you couldn't have that because there already was a sister in the order with the name of Sister Mary Barbara. And so she, on the day of her clothing, when she took her vows, she was upset and she was crying because she wanted to take that name. And one of the sisters said, just have faith. And by the end of the ceremony, she got word that she could have the name of Sister Barbara because the sister passed away. Yeah, it was really kind of interesting. So that's how we got the same name. And we actually, it's sort of like a comedy routine when we would call our other brothers and sisters, hi, this is your Sister Barbara. And they say, now, which one are you? And so we sort of would banter back and forth like that with our family and friends. So that was funny.
Yeah. So there are 13 years between the 2 of you.
Yes.
And this is a memoir that both of you have written together.
Right.
So how did that 13 years affect your memories?
As I said, at 5 years old, I really don't remember a lot. So I depended on her writings. Now, when she would come to visit me, she wanted to write her memoir. Mm-hmm. And she would visit me here on the Cape. And she would bring her papers and her journals, and she would begin, and I would try to help her to organize it. And she was going to write it. Now, I was already had 2 books finished, and so she thought, okay, I'm going to do it too. And she had every intention to do this. And as time progressed and she got older, about 5 years ago, I noticed that she was failing in her health and probably was not going to finish the book. And that's when I would go to visit her in the convent and visit with her in Ohio. And I would do my writing, and she would do her writing, but I noticed that she had a purse that she carried around all the time with a notebook, and she wrote everything down, which was okay, but that was the beginning of the failing of her brain. And so I kind of had a feeling something was going on, and she just knew she wasn't going to finish it. And one night I went to sleep praying to my mother, and I'm not a very religious person, I'm more of a spiritual person, but I was still praying to my mom. And what can I do? What am I going to do? I don't have time to do this.
Yes.
And I woke up and had a dream, and it said, I'm going to write it with her.
Oh.
And so I shipped all of her journals and boxes back home to Cape Cod. I think there were 6 boxes we shipped home. And I just decided, she was thrilled.
From Cleveland?
Yeah, from Cleveland, Ohio, back to the Cape. And she was just, the minute I told her, she was just, oh, praise the Lord, thank you so much. I knew you would do it. So that's what happened.
That's great.
And then I decided to use her words as much as I could. And a little unusual in the book because I have a lot of italics, which represent her words.
Right. Right.
But it worked.
Yes, yes, indeed. So the book begins with the story of the immigrants in your family. So this is a very interesting topic these days. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I knew a lot about my ancestors from my mother. And she knew more than my father did about his. And it was kind of fun. I researched, I went on Ancestry.com, of course, like everybody does, trying to find their families. And I searched and I found the roster of my grandfather and mother on the logs of the ships and everything. And I could see that my grandmother had $8 on her and was heading to New York.
From where?
From, my grandmother came from Hungary, Austria-Hungary. And my grandmother, this is on my mother's side, he also came from Austria-Hungary, and he had $8. So I don't know whether that was the money that you had to have, but they also had to have somebody that they were going to go to and had to have a job ahead of them. So it was fun researching and figuring out where they were in different time periods, the 1910 census, the 1930 census. So I had fun doing that. My father was a little bit, his ancestors were a little secretive, and I don't know why. I think because, I don't know why, maybe because they were German.
Maybe, yeah. Right.
And they didn't talk much. And my paternal grandfather and grandmother did not speak very well. They did not speak English very well. And that's the way it was. So
did they experience anything negative?
Yes, my father's father couldn't find a job because they wouldn't hire him. This was in like the 30s, 20s, 30s. They wouldn't hire him because he was German. And he eventually couldn't find a job. He started to drink, and that's what killed him early on. He became an alcoholic, and it just took him over. And
Right. Yes, but the family did find work eventually. The women.
Well, actually, my father, who was a senior, he was a senior in high school, had to quit school and become the breadwinner of the family.
Right.
He had 2 younger brothers, and
the women.
Actually, yeah, the women they took in ironing and did housekeeping.
Yeah,
that's pretty much what they did. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I think in the book, I found it very interesting. It's stated in the book that its purpose is to tell stories of the family's heritage for the next generations, and I think it's interesting to have the 2 different perspectives on the family's history. Was it helpful in putting the pieces together? Would you recommend it to other memoirists?
Absolutely. To know where, you have to know your past in order to go ahead to your future, which is a common saying everybody says, and it's true. I think it's important to find out, if you ever could find out, the motives of what and their choices were, why they made those choices. Sometimes you can tell by looking at the census. Surprisingly, the census even told how, if you had a radio, in your apartment? And that was an
Really?
actual question.
Oh, my
If you
goodness.
had a radio.
Uh-huh.
Because that way it would give the government the idea that you were trying to learn English
Uh-huh.
and were wanted to become an American.
Yeah.
Whereas the other people who didn't have a radio, maybe they wanted to hold on to their heritage more. So,
Right, yeah.
yeah, I thought that was fascinating.
Right. And your placement and your sister's placement in the family gave you probably different perspectives of who your parents were.
Absolutely. We had we had the same set of parents, but we were raised completely differently. My younger brother, my brother and myself. And then there were the 3 older girls with Sister Barbara was the oldest of.
Uh-huh. Right.
And
right.
we would just compare, and I would say, we would be driving on the Cape roads, and she'd be telling me something that she remembered about Mom and Dad always did this, and I said, are you kidding? They never did that with me.
Uh-huh.
What are you talking about?
Yes.
And so it was just kind of funny. I think they
Right.
kind of said, what the heck? You know, with the first kid, you're a little harder, and then it gets down to the end and say, let him go. And that's what happened to my brother and I guess, but we turned out fine. Everybody turned out fine.
Yeah, right. Well, would you give us a description of your sister's life as an Ursuline nun?
From what I can figure out from her notes and stuff, she really was very happy.
Mm-hmm.
There was only the one time that she was really sad when she was an early postulant before she actually took her final vows, and she wanted to go into and teach music.
Mm-hmm.
And the higher up said, no, you need to become a teacher. And she cried and was very sad. And then there was an older sister that had come towards her and said, now don't worry. She said, God will find you a way to enjoy your music. And it happened that she received a degree in education. She received a master's degree in administration in education, and she also got a degree in musical therapy. So it all sort of worked out in the end. But
Right.
she was happy, and it was strict in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Very strict. You had to change your name. You really couldn't visit with your family very well, as quickly as you wanted to. You had no communication with them except on a weekend or whatever, and we had to go and visit her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really, like I said, for as young as I was, I just didn't know what went on behind the closed doors with her.
Right.
But everything was fine compared to her notes and her
Mm-hmm.
remembrances.
She lived in a convent, but then when Vatican II came along, there were
Right.
changes.
Right.
So how did she?
They started
cope?
to live in communities where they taught,
Mm-hmm.
so that they would buy a house. The order would buy the house, or they would rent, and then a group of sisters would either they would be nurses or therapists, teachers, and they would live in this house separate from the convent. So she was pretty much on her own for a long span of time after Vatican II, because prior to that she would stay in the convents of these elementary schools that were attached to the churches then.
Right. And she was able to change her clothing, right?
Oh, that came, gosh almighty, I'm trying to think, probably in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to tell the story, but it's a great story. I'm going to tell it anyway.
Oh, good.
She had been asked to design the clothes if they would get rid of the big starchy habits that are this one here,
Right.
even that. And they wanted to get rid of that, and they were going to go to a gray dress with a simple cross and this and that and a certain length. And they asked her to design it because she was good at sewing. And my mother even helped a little bit, forming the patterns. And so, but they were put aside until they would actually get word that they could change into the clothes.
Yeah.
And finally the word came down, and my sister and about 4 or 5 other sisters that were at that time living in a house, and they got word, and they went out and they threw all their old outfits into a big barrel and set it on fire. Now, some sisters didn't agree with that, but there were the majority of the sisters wanted to get rid of it. They just felt better and freer, more connected to the community.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Right.
Did it seem to them that people could relate to them?
Yes.
In a better
Yes.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was also a dancer? She did
She
liturgical
did.
dance?
She did liturgical dance. Again, another divisive part of the Catholic Church. Some people liked it. Some people didn't like it. And but she just went ahead because she's musical. She loved to dance, and this was her way of doing it. And she did liturgical dance. She actually danced at the baptism on the Cape here for my second youngest, Anna.
Oh.
Yeah, at the ceremony. Now, she did ask all the other parents there that were having their child baptized if
Right.
it was okay.
Yeah.
And they all said that was fine.
Oh, boy.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. You did a lot of traveling between Cleveland and Cape Cod. She came to Cape Cod.
She did. She
on
came every year,
vacations.
right,
Yeah.
in the summer, or a couple of times she came at Christmas, and that was fun. But
Yeah.
usually it was in the summer.
Right, so there are stories a little bit about Cape Cod in this book too, which
Absolutely.
brings in
Yeah, we go
some
to-
of our
right, yep.
local color here. I noticed that the book does not shy away from the abuses that came to light in the Catholic Church.
Right. And we've talked about it when she would come and visit with me, and she never really came into contact with someone who was accused at that point. Later on, we did find out that there were a few priests that were connected with our family and so on, but it never happened to us.
Yes, yeah.
And it was a tough time. It was
Very,
really
yes,
hard, yeah.
Yes, and it's still
It is still is, right.
yeah,
But she still
yeah.
stayed.
Right, she never lost her faith.
No, I really wanted to find out why she stayed so long, to be such a committed person to this way of life.
Right.
And she did have several marriage proposals along the way.
She did, while she was
Yeah,
a nun?
She did, yeah,
Oh.
from other priests and seminarians and brothers.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they all left, of
Yes,
course, and found other people. But she just, because she's really very pretty and very nice and pleasant and funny. And she just
As you
said,
are. That's running the family.
Oh, you're thinking. But she always felt she was married to Jesus.
Yeah.
That was her friend.
Right.
And she was really devoted to Jesus, as she says. And
Right.
she just said, there was only one person in my life. That's him.
And when she had setbacks in her ministry, there were things that she wanted to do that they didn't approve.
Right, right. That always, that comes with any organization, any a job that you have. There's always going to be something that you will not agree with, and yet you stay.
Yeah.
And you feel, I'm going to do something else, or I'm going to approach it. I tell my kids all the time, you're not, some things you can't change, but it's how you face them that makes the difference. If you're going to face them with negativity, you're going to be unhappy. If you face them with a positive and look for something good, which I think she did all her life, then it makes you a little bit better,
Right.
a little happier.
I think this is a perfect place to talk about the story that's in the book about the women of Weinsberg, Germany.
She's always told that story, and I'm going to probably not get my facts right, but the bottom line is that there was a city back in the 12th century, or I don't know when, and there was an enemy that approached the wall. And now this city was actually led by a woman.
Oh.
And so the enemy approached the wall and gave a message to say that I'm going to let all the women and children leave and carry whatever you can, and you're going to leave. And then, of course, the rest, all the men are going to be killed. They're going to attack. So that night, they all talked about it, I guess, and the following morning, the gates opened, and the big guy is standing there, whoever it is, and the women walked out with their children and carried their husbands on their backs. Such a great story.
Oh my goodness.
The
It is
power of
so
a woman that can do
wonderful.
and make those
Yes.
choices. So I
Yes,
thought that was
yes.
a pretty good story.
Yes.
And she often tells that story wherever she goes. She tells stories a lot whenever we would go places.
Really, yeah. Now, your mother is a very strong influence in your family's life in particular. How did she?
Yeah, she was really strong, probably a little too stubborn. My husband says, you're just acting like your mother right now. You're awful stubborn. And I said, well, those are good qualities.
Yeah,
it's knowing how to temper them.
Right.
And my father was a good influence, but the poor guy worked 3 jobs sometimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We all went to Catholic school. We all had to have uniforms and special, you could only wear certain shoes and the books. And 5 kids is a lot of kids to support.
Right.
And so he was in our life, but still not, because my mother was there more.
Right.
Because she stayed at home. She finally went to work when my brother and I were probably in grade school. But she was home at 3. You know.
Yes.
And again, she would never have done that with the 3 older sisters.
Oh, right.
But she did with us.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So she had a really.
So she was a strong influence.
Yes.
And
was she the one that did the religious education in the family?
I think they both did. But yes, she did.
Yeah. Right.
And we all, of course, went to Catholic schools and
right.
learned everything that we were supposed to.
So what lessons do you think you've learned from your sister?
I'm trying to think. I had a thought and now it just flipped right out of my head, but I can't remember. But I think she's really taught me about commitment. And how to face something. Actually, she did teach me something really neat. I've always been fearful of flying from the very beginning when I was young, and up until probably about 20 years ago. Now I do a lot of flying, but she taught me how to face it.
Really?
I couldn't believe it, because she would fly here to the Cape from Ohio. And she said, Barbara, she says, I don't get too nervous, and what I do is I don't pray for me to be safe. I pray for the pilot that he has a good night and that he has a good family and he's happy.
Oh.
And I pray for all the stewardesses that help us and the stewards that help us, that they are happy in their lives. And I pray for the guy that's looking at the underneath of the plane, because that he's okay and he's happy and he's doing his job and he's proud of what he's doing.
Right.
That's who she prays for. And for some reason, it works.
Yes.
It takes my mind off of my fears
Right.
and channels them to them.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So I don't get too nervous anymore to fly.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, is there anything else that you want to tell about the book that I haven't asked you?
I do know that I had one surprise. I go to a lot of art and book expos and sell a lot of books. And her book has been selling pretty good. And one thing that I didn't expect, that I had received feedback after they had read the book and gone like a week or 2 after they bought it, that I was getting responses from people who are facing retirement, especially religious. Because in the book, I talk about how, and she talks about how angry she was that she was told to give up her ministry because of her age.
Right.
And how she faced it. And I write about that. And she faced it again she knew it was going to happen, and she faced it with a positive attitude. Well, these people that bought the book that were on the verge of retirement said that they really enjoyed the book because it showed them a new and a better way to face retiring.
Right.
And they knew they were going to be facing that same point that they would say, you have to give up this ministry that you're in now.
Right, right.
And so that was a different twist that I didn't think the book would generate.
Yes.
But it did.
She seemed to have a lot of different ways of looking at things.
Right.
So it's a really good look at somebody's religious life inside of the church as a nun, and for people that are interested in that, it's great. There are also the family relationships that are wonderful, and the faith, of course. So writing this different from the other books that you have written?
Well, as you know, in my other books, I write thrillers, so I have to do away with people.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it in this book.
No.
I had to stick with the facts.
She's still alive, right?
She is. Yeah, right. And in fact, I'm on the 4th book, just finishing it up now, and I had to do away with 2 good people and 1 bad villain. Mm-hmm. And it took a lot out of me.
Right.
But I couldn't do that with hers.
No.
No, I had to stick with the fact. I couldn't make anything up.
Yes.
Which
do you
I
want to give
like
us
to
the
do.
titles of your other books?
Sure. The first one is the Old Cape House. That was the first one I wrote. It has to do with the Sam Bellamy and Goody Hallett, that legend, and so on. And then I wrote The Teapot, and that is a follow-up on the legend, so to speak, and I follow the trails of 2 pirate survivors from the Whydah pirate ship. Now, I write in alternating chapters between time periods.
Okay.
So I have a modern-day heroine who finds something today, and then in the next chapter, I will take you to the person who put that item there in whatever time period or century it is, and then I alternate the chapters back and forth. And then the third one is the Old Cape Hollywood Secret, and my modern-day character goes to Hollywood and uncovers a sort of a cold case from 1947. So I go to the 20th century and go back and forth, and it's about Cape Cod and Hollywood.
Great. It sounds great. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for being here today, for telling us about your family, your sister in particular, and about the sharing of the writing of this wonderful memoir. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for Books in the World, and we hope that you will look into the books of Barbara Eppich Struna, and especially Family, Friends, and Faith that we've talked about today. And we will be seeing you in our next episode. And so thank you very, very much for being here. Bye.